You should explain what nested loops are. Plenty of us out there wanting to learn. What's up, guys? My name's John. I'm a software engineer with about 10 years of experience. I teach people to code. In this video, I'm going to tell you what a nested loop is. Then I'm going to go beyond that and explain where this question came from. Hint, it came from a joke. So I'm going to explain the joke, and then I'm going to go beyond that and explain more about where you can learn programming fundamentals. Before we dive in, if you want to learn to code, check out latterly.io. This website is fully open source. You can look at the code at the GitHub in the bottom. Join the Discord. You can sign up for free, unlock some features as little as $1 a month. So the answer to where can you learn more about the fundamentals of programming and even some advanced topics is included in this checklist. The answer's right there. We'll dive into that more later. So what is a loop in programming? A loop is when you have a list of items and you want to go through them and do some logic on each of those items in that list. Here's an example of the code in front of us using JavaScript, but loops exist in every language. In your normal day-to-day life, here's some examples of lists. The alphabet, the numbers 1 through 10. It's just a list of numbers, right? A receipt, a grocery receipt, it has a list of stuff on there. I could do a loop over there and I could say, what was the cost of each item on my receipt? That would be a for loop. I would say, well, the toothbrush was $1, the toothpaste was $3. You see how I'm checking for each item? And then what is a nested loop is a loop inside of a loop. A really common example of a nested loop will be a spreadsheet. So here we have a spreadsheet in front of us. You can see not only do I have a bunch of rows, but for each row, I have a number of items within it. Going back to the receipt at the grocery store example, we talked about each of these items having a cost. That's just one thing, right? But items at the grocery store have a number of properties we could talk about. So I just made up a spreadsheet with some examples. The item name, the cost, the weight, the size, the rating. And so what you can do here is you can say for each item, tell me about each of the properties. And you see how I have a loop inside of a loop. Another example of this might be if you have a bunch of kids in a school classroom and you want to sort them by their names. A teacher might say, hey, let's sort you by your last name alphabetically, but what if two kids have the same last name? So then you might need to sort them by their first name after that. So in the example of sorting kids by their names, you can see I have a loop for each last name, and then inside of that list at the same last name, I would need to do for each first name. Let's take a quick 15-second look at the TikTok that kicked off this question. We'll come back, I'll explain the rest of the joke, and then I will point you to a website that has some of these additional coding basics beyond the for loop, including variable naming, declaring a function, and other coding basics.
Have you ever heard of the nested loop technique?
Bro, I'm a JavaScript developer. That's the only way I write code. I always nest loops. What is constant time? So there's basically like three parts of this joke. The first part is where I say I'm a JavaScript developer. And the overall theme of the joke is inefficiency. That JavaScript has this reputation for being like an inefficient programming language where we're often doing loops that we don't need to be doing. And it's true. And the reason for that is because JavaScript code is often on the front end. And when you're on the front end in a website, you often don't have big data. And so doing extra loops doesn't cost that much. Okay, so this is referring to a concept in computer science called time and space complexity. If you are learning to code, you're going to learn about this. You don't need to learn about it at the start. This is going to be something that you study more right as you start to go into your interviews. And the reason is when you write an answer to an interview question, it looks really good if you can create an efficient solution that like uses very little memory, it's really fast, it doesn't cost that much to run your code. But you don't need to know that from the beginning. You can just kind of get started doing whatever, and then you'll run into performance problems, and then you'll have a need to optimize. So here's the Wikipedia article on time complexity, and at interview time in particular, we're usually talking about big O notation. And so the comment about constant time, what is constant time? That's O of 1. That's basically as efficient as you can get. There's no loop involved. It just takes a constant amount of time. What would be an example of constant time complexity? Think about the case where you're sorting the kids in your classroom. Let's say there's 30 kids in the classroom and you already sorted them once. Every other time, assuming the kids in the classroom don't change, it'll always be immediate because everyone will already know their spot in line. There's always going to be 30 kids. It's a constant number. If you already know the basics of coding and you want to practice a related algorithm, check out TwoSum, very famous easy problem that will show you the difference between a nested loop and a linear time implementation, where you only go through the loop once and you don't need to nest it. So here you're given a list of numbers, could be like 1 through 10, and you're given a target sum, and you want to know, are there two numbers in there that add to that sum? But if you're clever, and I'm not going to give away the answer, if you're clever, you can determine the answer going through the list one time. Think about the kids in the classroom again. Remember when we had to sort them by last name, but then if there were 10 Smiths, you would have to sort them by their first name? You can actually do this in one pass if you sort on their full name instead of looking at their last name and their first name individually. Squish those names together and you can sort it once. There's no nested loop. Pro tip, if you ever need to sort kids in your classroom. So here we are back on Laterally, and the number one place that I recommend that you learn to code is Coursera. It has a fee, and I'll tell you, for the very basics, like for loops, variable assignment, declaring functions, it's overkill. So you can start with Codecademy free courses or with free Codecamp to learn these very basic elements. For free Codecamp, check out the JavaScript algorithms and data structures certifications in particular. For Codecademy, you can check out the very good free Learn JavaScript course. This course is not going to get you job ready, but it's a really great introduction to those core programming concepts. Hope you found this interesting. Follow the channel if you want to learn to code, share it with your friend, and I'll talk to you next time.